is also going to be videotaping this. So that means that I don't know if it's live stream, but I think people will be able to watch it on ActonTV. So with that, I'm going to give the mic over to Carrie. And Carrie, thank you so much for coming out to Acton, for all of your work at the State House, and for your presentation tonight.
Great. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and thank you for that great introduction. So my name is Carrie Katan. I work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to energy affordability and speeding the transition to a zero carbon world. So just as a little bit of housekeeping, energy policy is a tad complicated. There's a few things I need to get through. So if you could hold your questions to the end, that would be great. We have plenty of time for questions after the presentation. So, a quick outline for today's presentation. How are gas and electric rates set? Why are prices so high? What does the future look like? And then what can you do about the situation we find ourselves in? Okay. To kick things off, it's important to say that electric and gas distribution companies are natural monopolies. So this means companies like Eversource, National Grid, or if you live in a municipal light plant community, one of those municipal light plants. That basically means that there cannot be functional competition. You cannot have two different electric companies running wires to people's homes. That gets ruinously expensive very quickly. At the very beginning of the electricity industry, that was kind of how things operated, and that was profoundly dysfunctional. So now we basically have a monopoly-based system. And there are two ways you can have a monopoly without the monopoly company immediately abusing their position to overcharge people. One is you can have the government directly own the monopoly. Hence, you get municipal light plants, which are just government-owned electric companies. The other is you give the monopoly in a certain region. In Massachusetts, we break it up mostly by town to a company. So this means Eversource and National Grid are granted monopolies over the right to distribute gas and the right to distribute electricity within the towns in their jurisdiction. And in return, the state can decide what is a just and reasonable gas and electric rate for them. Okay, so a little bit of debate here. What actually counts as just and reasonable, and how on earth do you determine that? That job is left up to the commissioners of the Department of Public Utilities, and it works kind of like a legal case, except instead of where the commissioners kind of sit as judges, where instead of them determining the guilt or innocence or the prison term of the person on trial, it is determining how much money the utility gets in return for the work that they have done. So the utilities will start a case called a docket, and they will argue that we have done X, Y, and Z work, we deserve this amount of money, and we should be able to collect it from our ratepayers by charging X rates per kilowatt hour or X rates per unit of natural gas. And then on the other side, you have the Attorney General's office kind of acting as the defender of ratepayers. Their job is to challenge the utilities, being like, it didn't cost you so much to do this, or you didn't need to spend this money, or we don't actually owe you money for doing this, and to argue that ratepayers should pay less. This one answers a question I hear a lot, which is, why can't the Department of Public Utilities just reduce rates? I think everyone's at some point looked at their gas or electric bill recently and thinks, this isn't okay. I don't know what's happening, but I don't like it. And to defend the Department of Public Utilities, they are limited in what they can do and what they can legally decide, partly by the U.S. Supreme Court over about 100 years of cases. The Supreme Court has basically said that corporations are people with rights, and a right of a utility is to get a reasonable rate of return on their investments. And then there's also the practical standpoint, which is the utilities fund a lot of their investments from maintaining their gas pipe infrastructure to building electric substations with debt. And if they can't borrow money, then they just cannot build the infrastructure that is necessary, and they cannot maintain their current infrastructure, which leads to reliability issues, to say the least. So if they are not paid enough to deal with their debts, they just will stop doing things. So even if the Department of Public Utilities woke up tomorrow and they all decided we're going to reduce electric and gas rates in half, that would just cause a lot of issues down the line. It is unfortunately a tad more complicated than that. Okay, so we've just been talking a lot about the distribution utilities, which are natural monopolies. But what about electricity supply? Because unlike with distribution, you can have competition in this space. You can buy electricity from a power plant in Maine, or a solar farm in New Hampshire, or a windmill in Massachusetts. There are limits to this competition. You cannot just buy electricity from Texas because the electric grid is not able to distribute electricity from such a great distance without a lot of loss, and that would be profoundly inefficient. So there's only competition within a limited geographic region. Most of the time in New England, that is just limited to other parts of New England, because we kind of have a separate power grid that's different than the one in New York and different than the one in Canada. But within this area, there can be competition over supply. And in the 1990s, the utilities, besides for the municipal light plants, which were allowed to continue doing their own thing, the big utilities, Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, were broken up so that instead of owning power plants and then selling, and then using their own distribution network to give their customers electricity, they were basically turned into middlemen. The state looked at them and said, your job is now to buy electricity from these independent generation companies that own all the old power plants you used to own or built new power plants, and you're going to sell that electricity to ratepayers, but you're not actually going to make it in most instances yourself. And the idea is that this would create more competition between different generation companies to sell electricity at the lowest cost. That is also an interesting reason why, one of a few reasons why Massachusetts utilities don't actually make money selling you electricity or gas. It is irrelevant to how much money they make, how many kilowatts you use, or units of gas you consume. They make more money by building the infrastructure that moves that electricity or that gas to your house, and then they will charge you whatever rate they need to get that money back that the Department of Public Utilities allows. So the fact that they make all their money from building infrastructure may come up again later. So this gets into one of the more practical parts of this presentation is, as a residential customer outside of municipal light plant territories, there are 3 ways you can buy power. If you're in a municipal light plant, you can buy it from the municipal light plant, or that's actually your only option. So there's 3 ways: basic service, third-party suppliers, and municipal aggregation. So in basic service, what happens is every 6 months, National Grid or Eversource will go out to all the independent power generators in New England. They'll say, okay, we need this number of kilowatt hours, and then they'll accept bids from different generation companies to supply that power. They take all those bids under the Department of Public Utilities supervision. They pick the cheapest ones, and then they sell the electricity on to their ratepayers at whatever, basically whatever it costs them to get per kilowatt hour. So again, this is just the utilities acting more as a middleman. Because they do this once every 6 months, that is why you see utility basic service rates shift pretty dramatically once every 6 months. This doesn't tend to be the cheapest way to buy electricity, because having 6-month contracts can sometimes be inefficient. Like, say it is the beginning of 2022, you're National Grid, and suddenly there is a natural gas shortage that's jacking up electricity rates. And because your 6-month contract is over, you now need to go out and buy electricity during the most expensive electric market that anyone can remember for a bit. That is why National Grid's supply rates went up to 33 cents a kilowatt hour for a few months, which is wildly high by any standards. But for all the faults of basic service, it is not the worst way to buy electricity. Let's talk about the worst way to buy electricity. These are third-party electric suppliers. So these are independent companies that are allowed to sell electricity directly to residential customers. These, along with breaking up the big utilities in the 1990s, came about as a plan to, bring the capitalist free market into what was essentially a very state-controlled command economy system that had existed up till that time. Unfortunately, third-party suppliers are a part of this picture that did not work. They were basically unregulated. Unlike basic service, the Department of Public Utilities does not have to approve their rates. They can charge whatever they want as long as they're contractually able to do so. They have a long history of lying to customers, greenwashing their products, pretending like they are more environmentally friendly than they actually are, and violating consumer protection laws. The Attorney General's office, under both then Attorney General Maura Healey and the current Attorney General, both have advocated for banning these suppliers. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is also amongst the organizations working to try to ban these companies from selling to residential customers because of their history of abusive practices. And to be blunt, as an entire industry, they don't have a logical business model that makes sense outside of tricking people into signing contracts that they should. At the end of the day, the utilities have economies of scale, and the utilities aren't actually making money supplying power, which means they're doing it at cost. So if you're a third-party electric supplier, you need to both spend a lot of money on marketing to get people to sign up to your products, and you need to be competing against a primary opponent who is basically fighting you at cost and does not care if they make money doing that. And that's not a winnable scenario, which is why that they tend to just kind of be scams. We strongly advise you to never sign a contract with any of them. If any of them offer you a contract, 9 times out of 10, there is some kind of catch in the fine print that will allow them to increase your electric rates later. Okay, then here's the way we at Green Energy Consumers Alliance always support, which is municipal aggregation. Municipal aggregation is when a town goes out and buys electricity on behalf of its residents. This tends to be better than basic service because municipal aggregation contracts tend to be longer. So for instance, a town can sign an agreement to buy electricity for 2 to 3 years rather than 6-month chunks. And so these contracts tend to be a tad cheaper than what basic service can offer at good times. And when electricity rates get really high, if you are in a town with a long-term contract, it doesn't matter if the price of electricity is spiking, you have that price already locked in at a lower rate. So a lot of towns that had municipal aggregation did not actually experience the electricity price increase at the beginning of 2023 with the rest of the state. So every non-municipal light plant town in Senator Eldridge's district either has municipal aggregation, or I think in Maynard, the current case is they are working on setting it up. So this is great. If you live in a town with municipal aggregation, we really recommend looking at their website. Some aggregation programs, like I have Acton's up here, offer different options. So if you want to buy more green electricity, you can. If you want to have the cheapest option, you can also do that, though not all municipal aggregations offer options. Okay, gas is different. For one, there is no municipal aggregation in gas, but like with power generation, the utilities don't really actually supply the gas themselves. They are just buying the gas from the big interstate pipelines that bring it in, and then they're selling it at cost. Like the electric utilities, the gas utilities make their money building infrastructure. They don't actually care how much gas they sell. Selling gas is just the thing that they have to do to justify building infrastructure. You can buy gas from a third-party supplier. It's very uncommon. Don't do it because, again, most of these third-party suppliers are unregulated scams. As a result of there not being municipal aggregation and third-party suppliers not being as active in this field, almost everyone gets their gas from their gas utility. Okay, so here's the reason you're actually all here. Sorry for wasting 20 minutes to get you here. So remember there's two kinds of utility costs: supply, making the power, buying the gas, and delivery, getting that gas or power to your home. Sometimes in the winter of 2022 to 2023, there will be a shock increasing the cost of gas. This can obviously impact the amount that you have to pay for natural gas to heat your home. It can also impact electric bills. Because the way that the New England electric market works is basically a lot of companies are always bidding, saying, if you give us 5 cents a kilowatt hour, we're going to turn on our gas plant and we're going to put electricity onto the grid. And if the cost of natural gas goes up, a lot of natural gas plants, which generate most of New England's power, will go to ISO New England that runs the local power grid, and they'll be like, well, we're not really willing to turn on our gas facility unless we're getting 7 cents a kilowatt hour or 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And that, because so much of our power comes from natural gas, when these gas generators are willing to turn on really determines the price of electricity for all of us. But outside of these supply shocks, the biggest, most consistent cost driver for high electric bills over the last couple of years is actually delivering gas and electricity. Okay, to explain why, I need to cover something that is incredibly non-counterintuitive about electricity sales and costs, which is normal supply and demand that you used to thinking of does not exist amongst them. So for instance, if more people buy electric vehicles, demand for oil falls, therefore the price of oil falls. That is normal supply and demand. That is how we're all used to things working. Utilities, they ignore that. They don't have normal supply and demand. So let's say people use Mass Save to make their homes more efficient and to switch from gas to electric heat pumps. So that would cause demand for natural gas to go down, and that would cause the per unit delivery cost of gas to increase, and the reason that happens is because it costs the gas utility a certain amount of money to maintain their infrastructure, like the gas pipeline to your house, and they recoup that by selling you gas. If suddenly everyone were to buy half the amount of gas infrastructure they have to maintain does not suddenly become half. They still need to spend basically the same amount of money keeping the system going, but now they need to charge everyone twice as much to keep it going. So, why do we have such high electricity prices? A big honest factor is that prices are determined based off how much utilities spend, not how much gas and electricity we sell. And anyway, this gives the utilities a massive incentive to overspend whenever they can. If they can make something if they can gold plate something, if they could make electrical transformers out of literal gold, they would try to find a way to justify that expense because that would increase their amount of profit. And this has also been combined in New England with flat electricity and gas demand over recent years. Part of that is good. We are a very energy efficient state. We've invested a lot of resources into energy efficiency. And on the individual level, that makes a lot of sense. It also means there's a lot of electrical infrastructure we haven't had to make. But it also means that the utility spending that we have done is being put on basically the same amount of kilowatt hours and the same units of gas as a decade ago. So if utilities spend more money, which they're always trying to do, that just results in higher electric rates. The fact that so much of our power and gas costs are really about how much utilities are spending versus the actual cost to generate electricity or the actual cost of gas in most years is a big reason why building a new gas pipeline, like some people are calling for, into New England wouldn't actually fix any of our problems. We don't have a natural gas shortage most of the time. In the dead of winter, when everyone is heating their home with gas, a lot of gas power plants in New England do switch over to oil, but that is, to be honest, a couple of times a year, and that's not a massive increase in costs for energy in New England. Our real factor is how much our utilities spend and how much gas and electricity we consume. So, what happens next? On the electric side, I honestly have to say I think anyone would make a lot of money if they could perfectly predict how electricity rates are going to move over the next 5 to 10 years. There are a lot of efforts to rein in utility spending as rates have become such an issue. Some of that is at the regional level. ISO New England, which runs the local power grid, has gotten a bit better at clamping down on utilities, who were up until recently spending a lot of money on interstate transmission lines because they figured out that was a way they could avoid a lot of regulation on how much money they could spend, so they could gold plate a lot of their projects. Other changes are coming in the form of legislation. The governor's energy affordability bill has a few different measures that could help reduce electric rates. I'm happy to talk about that after the main presentation. And then, oh yes, one side note I always like talking about when talking about the cost of gas and electricity is that I think a lot of people will get confused and they'll think, oh, if the cost of gas goes up, therefore, if the cost of gas that I have to pay for goes up, therefore the cost that the power plants that are using gas is also going up, therefore the price of electricity will also go up in tandem. That is kind of a misconception, because a lot of the price increases we're seeing on the gas side is the local distribution cost. It is the smaller gas lines that are taking the gas from the big interstate pipelines to your home. And a lot of the power plants in New England are connected directly to those big interstate pipelines. So they don't care about local gas distribution costs. That's not a factor to them. So in some instances, this is all to say, that the price that you pay for gas may go up quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean the price power plants are paying for gas is going up in the same way, and that doesn't mean that electricity costs are also going to increase. Okay, but I speak a little bit more about gas because the situation with gas rates overall is more concerning than electric rates. And the reason for that is because we are in a very uncomfortable place as a state with the cost of gas. Basically, demand for natural gas from residential customers has gone down a little bit over the last couple of years. At the same time, gas utility spending has continued to increase, partly because of a multi-decade, multi-tens of billions of dollar project to replace old gas lines called GSEP. And this is kind of creating a perfect storm of problems, where if the cost of gas keeps going up, electrification becomes more attractive, or people will simply find ways of using less gas. For instance, turning down the thermometer in the winter, sealing up their windows better. This could be electrification, this could be anything that pushes down demand for gas. That causes gas demand to fall, which, because now you have, again, the same amount or more gas utility spending, but less units of gas to cover that spending, you need to charge more per unit of gas if you're the gas utility, which drives more people to electrification, which drives less gas demand in a vicious feedback cycle. We, as a state, currently have absolutely no way of dealing with this. The way state law is currently written is basically under the assumption that our gas utilities will exist forever, and they will either be the same size or they will be expanding. Because up until very recently, it was state policy to encourage the expansion of the gas utilities. So this is kind of a problem, especially because the things that you can do if you're a gas utility to reduce how much you're spending can be quite tough. For instance, you could retire old gas pipelines, but there are people at the end of those pipelines, and right now under state law, there is no way of kicking someone off the gas system unless they voluntarily get off. So we don't have a way of reducing gas spending at the same rate that we are seeing gas demand begin to fall. So, what can you do as an individual? Going back to electricity, one thing you can do if you're outside of a municipal light plant is just know who your electric supplier is. Sometimes people sign up, pay more than they need to because they've signed up with a third-party electric supplier and they've forgotten about it. Sometimes you never signed up with a third-party electric supplier, but they're on your bill. This can happen for a variety of reasons, but it is a common enough crime that there's literally a word for it called slamming, and it is something that third-party suppliers are pretty routinely caught doing. One note is you can actually sign someone up for a third-party supplier with the information on their electric bill. And if you're thinking, couldn't just an unscrupulous third-party supply salesperson steal electric bills out of mailboxes? The answer is yes, and that happens because we have a terrible system of consumer protections when it comes to the electricity market. So make sure you know who your supplier is. You may be unpleasantly surprised. Once you've done that, you can also check out your town's municipal aggregation program. Again, if you're not in a municipal light plant, and you can see if they have options, and if so, what options are best for you. One other note is don't trust anyone going door to door selling electricity. Even if they say they are from your utility or municipal aggregation program, they're not. This is another thing that third-party suppliers do, is pretend to be from an aggregation program. It's really hard to overstate how awful some of these companies are. If you are a gas or electric customer of National Grid, Eversource, or Unitel, you or your landlord can contact MassSave. They can often provide subsidized or free assistance on things like energy efficiency or converting to electric heat pumps. If you are not a National Grid, Eversource, or Unitel customer, for either gas or electricity, you can see if your municipal light plant has similar options. You can also look into solar if you have a house that is good for it. You should be wary of bad solar companies. There are some out there. We recommend using Energy Sage. It is an online tool that can allow you to look through different options. And now I think I've talked your ear off enough. Do any of you have any questions? I guess you were first.
So, maybe, Carrie, you want to repeat the question just so that?
Yes.
No, that's fine. I might be able to speak louder. So, one kind of third-party supplier that a lot of us have been using has been through Energy Sage, which is to go to a third-party supplier of power for a solar field, where they basically sell you your power at 90% of your National Grid or Unitil or whatever bill. I just want to make sure those are not the people you're talking about.
Yes. So I guess to just repeat the question is basically, does community solar count as third-party suppliers? The answer is essentially no. Community solar is its own thing. Some community solar companies do behave badly, but it's not an instance where all of the companies should be treated with suspicion in the same way that third-party suppliers are. It's not as, the issues that we see are not as endemic as with other kinds of third-party suppliers. So definitely, if you sign up with them, make sure you do your research, make sure you're signing up with a good one. But that is different than like the clean choice energies or the other companies you really should avoid.
I have one other question. Is there any hope that the wind farms are going to get connected to help address the cost?
Yeah, so to the question of will any of the wind farms get connected to address the cost? The good news is Vineyard Wind is under construction. That project is too far along for the federal government to touch. New York also looks like they're going to get one more wind farm done. I think Rhode Island's also has another wind farm under construction. And since Rhode Island and Massachusetts are in the same electric grid, them also connecting their wind farm should help our electric rates as well. And then another big project happening is actually King Pine up in Maine, which has had some delays, but it's not offshore wind, it's onshore wind in northern Maine. So the federal government can't just blanket deny permits in the same way they can with the ocean. So once those projects go online, along with Hydro-Quebec's power line going into Massachusetts, that could help push down some electric rates. Obviously, it would be better if we had a pipeline of offshore wind projects like we wanted to build, but that may have to wait for a couple of years with the current federal government.
So, as long as we're in the business of calling out scams, when you mentioned that there are some funky solar companies as well, I wonder if there's been a lot of media attention recently, especially around people who, put heat pump systems in their house and then signed up with done a PPA, power purchase agreement with a solar company, and then in the fine print it says, of course, we can raise your rates like crazy, and people are freaking out because they don't read their contracts. So I wonder if you want to say anything about those kind of companies.
Yeah, that is definitely so PPA contracts are basically agreements where a company will put solar panels on your house and then basically sell you the electricity that they produce back at you. The upside to that is then you don't have the big upfront cost of solar. The downside of that is, now you have a company that kind of has a monopoly on selling you electricity, and they can abuse that to overcharge you. Unfortunately, this is an area where we would love to see more regulation. We're actually working on one solar regulation bill that should help with that, filed by Senator Driscoll this session. And we are definitely interested in the provisions of the energy affordability bill filed by the governor that could also help improve consumer protection laws in Massachusetts. Because right now with solar, we have this very weird and pretty bad regulatory landscape where we have the Department of Public Utilities sometimes regulates solar. We have the Department of Energy Resources, which regulates solar, but only if they're part of one specific program, which most residential solar hasn't been part of the last couple of years. And then we have the Attorney General's office, which does some consumer protection stuff, but they don't directly work on solar. And that kind of puts a lot of residential solar into this big gray area where it's not directly regulated by any one agency. And that's created a lot of space for companies like Sunrun to offer these long-term, very massive contracts as far as the amount of money they're worth to a normal person. These can be $10,000, $20,000, and some of these contracts have very nasty provisions in them, like we get to sell you electricity every year, and that electricity gets to become more expensive every year, which could mean in a 20-year contract, maybe you're saving a lot of money the first 5 years, maybe you're doing fine after that, but you could be in serious hot water the last 10 years of the contract. And we definitely need to make sure that, we're definitely working to make sure that that gets better, because some of the practices of solar companies have been quite bad as of recent years, and we need to make sure that all of them to some extent are regulated by the government so they cannot do that again.
Thanks, Chair. I had two questions. It might more later, but one is that on some of the responses to my post in this event are just about clean energy in general. Sometimes there's been a response from some people saying because just outside this area, there were efforts to stop some of the proposed gas pipelines, including the Keystone, is that if, those had been built, then the price of gas would have gone down. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so as far as, I guess just to repeat the question, if we had built more gas pipelines into New England, would the price of gas be lower? And the honest answer is for utility gas, the thing driving prices is the local distribution network. It is not buying the gas from, I think, mostly Pennsylvania. It is, in fact, as we use less and less gas, that is becoming less and less of the issue. Obviously, sometimes the price of natural gas will increase, but oftentimes when the price of natural gas shoots up in New England, it's also more expensive in Pennsylvania. So if you had a bigger pipeline to Pennsylvania, that wouldn't actually help you. That's kind of a weird, fallacy some people have. It's like, we could have cheaper gas. Like, the gas it's expensive at the gas fields too. It's expensive everywhere. That's what a global energy crisis is. So the idea that, it's just a pipeline issue is increasingly untrue. And one way you can actually see this is we have this thing in Massachusetts called the Everett Marine Terminal. It is a liquefied natural gas importation facility. And this is basically a big, very expensive plant which exists to take liquefied natural gas that can be brought in by ship and turn it into regular natural gas, which can go into pipelines. And the amount that we are using this terminal is rapidly decreased over the last couple of years because gas demand is going down. So the idea that we need more pipelines, it doesn't really track with the fact that we have a way to bring in natural gas by ship that already exists and is already built, and we are barely using it anymore, to the point where the state is actively having discussions about how we can get rid of it because maintaining it costs a couple $100 million a year.
And as a follow-up, is if those pipelines were built, are the utilities able to charge customers for the construction of that infrastructure?
So that's actually a really interesting question. And the answer is it depends a lot on who is building them, because Eversource and National Grid it's not a big part of their business model to go build out the intrastate pipelines. They are the local distribution people. So it could be built by a whole different company than Eversource or National Grid. And how they would get paid for building this pipeline is kind of unclear. Most of the time when you're building a pipeline to somewhere, it's because the demand for whatever the pipeline is moving in that place is going up. So they can just count on selling more of it. We don't have that in New England. I know the last time there was a big attempt to bring in a pipeline, the way that was proposed to pay for it was to actually increase everyone's electricity rates, which, is definitely not a solution that we need for any problem. Kind of defeats the purpose. So how we pay for it actually it's unclear. That's as it stands right now. There's just not a real business case. There is a strong political pressure from Washington to build more pipelines, but political pressure by itself does not build anything.
And my second question is, are you able to comment around mass saves as far as the fee that a lot of people see on many people see, unless they're served by a meeting? Just it's how that's used to help people lower their electric bills.
Yeah, so as far as what the fee for Mass Save pays for is, if you have not, as I said in the presentation, if you have not looked into getting a Mass Save consultation, I strongly recommend doing it as long as you don't live at a municipal light plant and get either oil or propane, you qualify for Mass Save. If you're one of the 100,000 homes that fall into that, that's unfortunate that we have that loophole. But what Mass Save can do is they can, they can test your home to see how energy efficient it is. They can look at possible upgrades, especially if you're low income, they can subsidize those upgrades. And that can be a very powerful tool for reducing your personal gas or electric use and therefore reducing your bills. That's also been a great tool the Commonwealth has used overall as a way of avoiding the need to build more power plants. A big reason that Mass Save was introduced is everyone looked around and figured out, hey, wait a second, it is cheaper to insulate people's homes than it is to build these big pipelines, and it is cheaper to make sure people's homes are energy efficient than it is to build new gas plants. So Mass Save can both directly benefit people, but it can also indirectly benefit us all by avoiding the need to build new infrastructure, which could cost more money than the Mass Save program, and by also obviously, improving our air quality through things like reducing gas use, which, reduces the amount of gas and oil burned.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the actual consumption? You talk about natural gas consumption going down. Is that overall? Is that per capita? What is there? Is it residential use or is it overall from an industrial perspective? What numbers are on?
Yeah, so the way that rates are set in Massachusetts is they're class-based, and the three big classes are residential, commercial, and industrial. So because of how costs are allocated, even if industrial customers started using more gas, they would only be paying for the parts of the gas system that directly impact them, not the overall gas system. So it's really worth looking at gas use by class. And in the residential class in Massachusetts, I think in 2019, we used 135, I think it's million cubic feet of gas. I'm probably getting the units wrong. There's about 5 different units for natural gas and none of them line up. We went from about 135 million units to about 109 million units. So it's not a massive fall, but we don't have any way to deal with that besides for increasing gas rates, which at a certain point does just lead to a vicious feedback loop of people using less gas because gas is expensive.
But like from an overall state home heating perspective, what percent is using natural gas versus oil versus electric?
Yeah, so about half of the state uses natural gas, about a little less than a quarter of the state uses oil, and propane is about 5%, and the rest, about 11%, is electricity. Annoyingly, the federal government only asks what fuel people use, so we don't know how much of that is electric resistance heat, which is old and incredibly inefficient, and how much of that is heat pumps, which is obviously much more efficient. In the last couple of years, we have seen we've seen a lot of oil homes switch to heat pumps because the economics of doing that have been really good. And actually, 2023 was the first year we saw the federal government estimate the number of gas-heated homes in Massachusetts actually fall by about 30,000. So that suggests there are some homes also there are more homes going from natural gas to electric heat pumps than there are homes entering the natural gas system at this point.
So a question on that. Where's the break even on heat pumps being more cost effective than natural gas? Is that something to happen now, next year, 5 years?
That is a great question, and it's honestly something I should have covered in this presentation. The break-even point is probably actually this, if you are an Eversource or National Grid customer, it's probably this winter because the Department of Public Utilities is requiring the 3 major electric utilities to have heat pump specific heating rates. So this basically means in the winter you will pay less for electricity than you would if you were a different kind of customer. You do need to seek this out and you do need to sign up for this rate if you are a heat pump customer and you qualify. And the reason the Department of Public Utilities is doing this is basically they realized, oh wait, the way that these heat pump customers use a lot of electricity, so they're paying a lot into the system, but they're not using a lot of electricity at peak times, which determine how much the system costs. So they're basically very good customers that subsidize everyone else, but we want people to get heat pumps, so having them subsidize everyone else through their electric bills is not efficient. So the Department of Public Utilities creating this new rate basically means heat pump customers can get considerably cheaper electricity in the winter. Exactly what those rates are going to be, I think, last I've checked, still need to be determined. We do know these rates are going to exist, and I think the goal is definitely to have them in place for next winter. The exact percentage discount, I think, I'm not sure if that's been determined yet. But that should make right now, I think heating with a heat pump that's decently efficient is about maybe a third more than natural gas. It really depends on the natural gas and electric rate of that year. It can shift a lot. If you're in a municipal light plant territory and you pay much lower rates on average than in those investor-owned utilities, the break-even point may have already happened possibly several winters ago. But if you're in a National Grid or Eversource customer, then honestly, the heat pump rates probably are going to either be the break-even point or not that far from it.
So the GSAP, Gas System Enhancement Plan, I half want to ask you, what is Green Energy Consumer Alliance doing legislatively so that the cost of that plan for replacing these pipelines is so huge that it could possibly put heat pumps in every house in the state. So, how to get, the select board here makes these decisions to open the streets and let them replace rather. And it just is so infuriating, because how do we make that really huge turn to get people, to get the GSAP plan money going to putting in heat pumps?
Oh, I've had so many meetings about that.
I want to hear it. It's so hard.
That's, last 2 years of my life, an embarrassing chunk of that has gone into answering that question. The big answer to it is because of a certain legislative body in Massachusetts, I'll give you a hint, it is not the Senate. We do not have good laws in Massachusetts at the state level about how gas utilities can behave, what they can spend money on, or how are they going to deal with the fact that they don't have a long-term business future, which I know a lot of people in gas utilities who deal with their policy work, they still haven't come to grips with the fact that a future without fossil fuels does mean they're fossil fuels. It has not really crossed their mind that their business is going to die possibly before they retire. But on the state level, there's also kind of that, in our laws, there's that refusal to admit reality. Right now, as I said before, if one customer on a street wants to continue using gas, the gas utility legally cannot stop serving that customer. Even if that means that gas utility needs to do $1 million of repair work on their old pipelines to continue serving that one customer, even if it makes no economic sense and it's a burden on every other gas customer, they still need to do it. So passing one piece of legislation we're fighting hard for this session is the tactical transition law. That would change something called the obligation to serve, and it would basically allow gas utilities to look at someone on an old gas pipeline and say, it doesn't make economic sense for us to continue serving you with gas. We can continue serving you another way. It doesn't get rid of their obligation to keep providing heat, but it just makes it non-gas specific. So for instance, they could be like, we will install a heat pump in your home, we will continue to be your heating utility, but we get to retire that gas pipeline in front of your house. Realistically, something like that is the only way we avoid the gas utilities having to increase rates to the point where they're all unaffordable, which is what we're currently on track to do.
A very quick follow-up. Didn't a law already pass that said that utility companies can deliver something other than their electricity with their gas? So that one step has been taken, is that correct?
Yes, so if you are there's kind of two things you need to do. You need to allow the utilities to serve people with something other than natural gas, which state law has allowed them to do. but you also need to say that the utilities are allowed to stop serving someone with natural gas. And that one they have not done yet. They actually passed what got passed last legislative session was actually such an ambiguously worded paragraph about the utilities' responsibility that we weren't sure for like a couple of weeks whether their obligation to serve existing customers had changed or not. And then the Department of Public Utilities had to say, no, this is how we read the legislation that passed. So that's still something we have to fight for, because if we can't shut down old pipelines, there's no way to keep gas affordable even in the medium term. Things are just going to keep getting worse.
So my question is for Senator Eldridge. What are the chances of the tactical transition law passing? Like, for example, there's a community in Newton, Garland Road, where it, and I guess it's National Grid, has decided they're replacing the pipes and it's gonna cost, I don't know, $2.2 million. And for $800,000, they can put in every single home, complete air source heat pump systems for, you know, it'd be huge savings. And in that case, the whole neighborhood agreed that they want to go that way. But, like, what are the chances that we could pass this law so that the utilities could say, listen, I know this one person's a holdout, sorry, but you're all getting air source heat pumps?
Absolutely, I do not know, I talked to Senator Barrett today just to talk about, bills, but the TUV committee hasn't heard that many bills yet, so it's not clear yet what we'll do on clean energy policy this session, so. Yeah, it's way too early to predict anything, so, yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Who is or are the sponsors of the tactical bill?
In the Senate, it is the Senator Cream. In the House, it is Representative Owens. And then I don't know if it's also Representative Armini. I think she co-sponsored a earlier version of this bill. I don't know if she's a sponsor of it again.
I have a couple other quick things. One is, do you know, is there any indication yet of how, if and when the, heat pump rates, electricity rates come to pass, how those will interact with muni aggregation program rates?
From my understanding so there's two ways you're billed on the supply side and the distribution side. My understanding is that the heat pump rates are either partly or completely on the distribution side. So they shouldn't impact you should be able to do that while being on municipal aggregation.
As a practical matter, how are they going to do heat pump rate if you don't have smart metering that accommodates that?
So they're not doing there's definitely cool things you can do with smart metering that we can't do yet, but basically they treat you just as a household. So they basically, if you sign up, they'll look at you being like, okay, you are a house with a heat pump, so we are going to, this is how we are going to treat every kilowatt we sell to you as this. So it's kind of a blunt force tool. It's not very clever because we don't have clever electric meters that would allow us to do anything better than that.
That's something effective.
Yes, it's only effective yes. Are heat pump rates only effective in the winter? To my knowledge, yes. I actually need to check on that. Because I think my answer is I'm pretty sure it's only effective in the winter, but I don't like saying things unless I'm sure.
You mentioned how common sense solar is and how it's something that, how a house could do relatively affordably. But will the federal discussion now of the budget, the Trump budget, the House has already decided to do away with all the incentives at, multiple levels. I mean, will that impact the solar industry in Massachusetts if the U.S. Senate goes along with canceling all the incentives?
Yeah, so to repeat that question, will the bill being discussed in Congress impact the solar industry in Massachusetts? The answer is the bill being considered in Congress could impact every single clean energy thing we have. It could make solar more expensive. That being said, like Massachusetts was installing a good bit of rooftop solar before the Inflation Reduction Act came into effect. So it wouldn't be good. I don't think it's the end of the world. At the end of the day, the cost of solar has gone down a lot over time, and it could still be viable for a lot of households, especially if electric rates keep going up, with or without federal support. Because there's also state level support, which does need to be considered.
Just as a follow-up to that, is solar a part of the governor's new energy affordability proposal?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, is solar part of the governor's energy affordability proposal? Yes, there are solar provisions in there, some of which actually, it kind of shifts a lot of the state subsidy systems for solar. It cuts back on some of the subsidies that currently kind of look overly generous. Some of those are kind of old, and they were designed when solar was a lot more expensive. So the state's kind of thinking, we can make sure projects are still viable while paying them a bit less, which will allow us to reduce electric rates. But one really cool thing the state is considering doing is, remember when I talked before about how solar policy kind of exists, solar consumer protection policy exists in this gray zone between different agencies. What the governor's energy affordability bill would do to fix that is it would require all residential solar to be part of the SMART program, which is a subsidy program run by the Department of Energy Resources. And that program has consumer protections built into it. So if this bill were to pass, it could have the possibility of allowing people to get access to solar without some of the consumer protection issues and some of the more scammy companies we've seen come up over the last couple of years. Because that could be a really exciting way of getting more people to have access to this technology without having to spend more money, which ultimately benefits everyone.
I mean, as someone who got solar, and then like that next summer, I mean, we didn't pay bills from March until October. I mean, we paid no electricity bill. It was beautiful.
Yeah, when solar works, it really works, and it's quite awesome. It is sad that sometimes, companies do unfortunate things with it, but if we can make sure that everyone has a story like that, that would be amazing.
So we're a solar company. We're very familiar with the malpractices of the industry. What are other ways that you see that are good ideas to regulate the industry so people are not just being scammed with like an escalator or like a crazy, interest rate that they're not like familiar with?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the biggest thing is just, I have to say, I'm not an expert on solar regulation myself. The legislative interest in the work we've done at Green Energy Consumers Alliance is just making sure someone is regulating solar and that someone has some idea of what they're doing, but we don't want to write the laws ourselves. I think DOER has a great history with their SMART program of setting conditions under which companies are allowed to behave on things like escalator rates and costs. I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, but I do know they've had a good bit of success with consumer protections. But I also know they're coming out with a new version of the SMART program this year, so I don't quite know how that may change.
Do you think that impacts net meter and like the one-to-one net meter with solar right now?
Yeah, on the residential side, that would get rid of one-to-one net meter and just replace it with the SMART program instead, which is just a different way of subsidizing solar.
I went to a hearing for the TUV last Wednesday, and the part that I was in was mostly addressing the third-party suppliers, and there were a lot of third-party suppliers making a pitch for their case, and everybody was disassociating themselves from door-to-door selling
Yeah, definitely. To, as far, yeah, I know that, I was at that hearing. I know the guy who said that third-party supplier and municipal aggregation is the same thing. This is a talking point of the third-party supply industry. They are supplied by the same, often the same companies, like Constellation is both a third-party supplier and it will supply power to municipal aggregation programs. But the difference with municipal aggregation, of course, is towns can hire lawyers and experts to make sure they're getting a good deal for electricity where regular people can't. As far as would it be complicated to get rid of third-party suppliers, it would actually be really easy. All you need to do is tell the utilities, hey, when a when a company asks you to switch over a customer to third-party supply, just don't do that. That's it. At the end of the day, the utilities are the ones that physically move people between different suppliers. So if they just stop doing that because they were told to by the state, we could end that industry pretty quickly without impacting municipal aggregation, because as much as companies want to pretend like they're the same thing, and the third-party supplier NRG put out a report saying third-party suppliers saved people a bunch of money because they treated municipal aggregation and third-party supply as the same thing. It's just not true. They are, in every practical sense, very different programs, one of which has a great history of saving people money, and the other one has a great history of ripping people off and taking, at the Attorney General's last estimate, $631, that's $631 million from electric ratepayers since 2017 compared to what they would otherwise have paid. From the utilities. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, so I'm on the Earth Climate Committee, and for the last 5 years or so, we've done a real good job of promoting heat pumps, solar, electric vehicles. But with the recent election, there's been more resistance to that, I'd say the last 6 months. And so I'm wondering if you've changed your overall pitch around clean energy law in light of what's going on at the federal level. If you could give us any advice on that.
Yeah, I've seen other organizations try to change their pitch, but to be honest, I don't think that's going to work. I think that, obviously, I think one important thing is always speak to your audience in whatever way. You guys all showed up about an event on electric rates, so I talked to you in a very technical way, in detail. I wouldn't do that for most people because most people wouldn't come to this event. But I would definitely say, if you're talking to an environmentalist, talk about saving the planet from climate change. If you're talking to someone who is just concerned about money and, they want to be warm in the winter and they don't really care about any of the details, if they are currently on propane or oil, you can talk about how a heat pump can save them money relative to that. Or, once we have a heat pump electric rate, you can talk to them. Maybe we'll have to see where gas and electric rates are this winter. Maybe you can say, if you had a heat pump, you'd be paying $100 less a month than gas. I think that's the argument that's, ultimately going to get more people, because I think you're always going to have some people who have very strong feelings about energy sources. I'm one of those people, but I know I'm weird. And I know, well, we all showed up to this event in one way or another. Yeah, none of you guys are normal.
I think the main argument is one around cost, where people don't believe that there's really that much of a cost benefit, and that has shifted over the last 6 months. And that in part is related to high electricity costs.
Yeah.
I think specifically help with that would be great.
Yeah, that definitely making sure that people are on municipal aggregation so that they don't think electricity is higher than it is because they're on a third-party supplier. There's definitely stuff we need to do on the legislative side as far as reducing electric rates as much as we can, because there is some stuff the state does that is not good, like the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, which is a fairly absurd program that we have left over from 2008. that subsidizes natural gas burning systems because that are more efficient. We're trying to actively get rid of that. We actually worked with Senator Eldridge on a bill on that.
I think one of the criticisms that we get often is that the state in particular has one of the highest electricity rates in the country. I think it's third highest, right? And we don't have a good answer to that, so we really need help from, you folks to basically help with that.
Yeah, no, that's really fair, and I think the reality of it is tough in Massachusetts because we have such high electric rates, and we need to do more about that.
I have a question, sticking with costs. How much is it going to cost to reach the net zero by 2050 mandate? Who's going to pay for it?
That is, I will say that is to a significant extent kind of we don't know, because like a decade ago, wind and solar were more expensive than like coal and natural gas. That's not true anymore. Cost shifted, technology shifted. We don't know what new technologies are going to happen. We're like 20 miles away from Danvers and Commonwealth fusion systems. We don't know in a year when they try to flick on their fusion reactor if that thing's going to work. So as far as like what the cost is going to be, I would say any prediction that's looking more than 5 years into the future as far as electric or gas rates is basically made up in fairy tales. What we do know is that if we work for this, we can reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we have to import into the state, which currently costs us billions of dollars a year. And we also know that if we all collectively as humanity fail to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, it is quite literally the apocalypse. So that's the only unsatisfying answer I'm capable of giving.
That's what I was going to say, is that with all the money and problems, is that the climate emergency has not changed.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse.
And it's going to get worse. So that's sort of the answer when people are
That's the message.
equivocating about it.
I think the issue is that older people totally believe that they don't keep a lot of help moving. In fact, they already move. And there's a whole other group of people that move purely based on cost.
Sure.
And we don't have a good answer to that. Like, if you go to Nebraska, the cost of electricity is 10 cents, right? Or it's a lot cheaper. We don't have a good answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah, we really don't.
And it's to think about it. That's the other piece of it, is that people are so scared to think about it. I feel it's my job to sort of get in there and say, actually, things are going to get worse. And there are lots of ways to explain that.
I mean, I wrote a novel about this, right?
I do want to keep the folks on questions. Yeah, I appreciate Carrie's time, so keep on questions from here.
When you say heat pump systems, are you referring to ground heat pump, air, or like mini splits, or what?
Yeah, when I say heat pumps, I mean air source heat pumps, mini splits, or ground source heat pumps. They're very different units in how they behave, how much electricity they use, but I do mean all of those kind of broadly.
And the ground coupled heat pumps are not very practical, I would say, in large parts of Acton. The parts that are not just farmland, that you can stick a pipe pretty far down. And so, are those people going to be limited to air coupled heat pumps? And therefore, there's going to be sort of a difference in costs for consumers depending on where they live in Acton or surrounding area?
Yeah, I think as far as to just repeat the question of will there be differences in cost in the future between people on ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps? The answer is probably, yeah, I would guess so. I don't know how many ground source heat pumps are actually going to get installed at the end of the day. They are quite, ground source heat pumps, if you don't know, they are very efficient, but they're also very expensive to install. So a lot of the heat pumps that have gone in have been air source heat pumps, which are somewhat less efficient, but they are much cheaper to install and much easier to install. So in the long run, this could create a cost difference between those who got ground source heat pumps and those who got air source heat pumps. But also, we've historically had cost differences. Historically, it's been if you have had natural gas, you've been paying much lower heating bills than if you were on oil or propane. So it wouldn't be a new thing if we end up with a system where some people have higher heating bills and some people have lower heating bills, and it varies even within the same town.
Did I hear you say that heat pumps? Oh, did I hear you say that heat pumps are really only for warmth? Because my understanding is initially they were for air conditioning, but we use ours for both. And you
Yeah,
didn't say that, I guess.
Yeah, I think I only talked about them for warmth, just because that's more my area of interest, or my area of policy work, I should say. Yeah, an air source heat pump is an AC that you can turn into reverse, which is very cool. So, yeah, you can use an air source heat pump to heat your home and cool your home. We actually just got an air source heat pump back at my apartment, and we are currently using it as an air conditioner over the summer. So that would definitely be great as far as making sure more people have access to cooling, especially in the hotter summers. You know, unfortunately, due to climate change, having an AC is probably going to be increasingly less optional in Massachusetts than it used to be.
Oh, do I have to do this? First up, I really appreciate your knowledge. I really do, thank you. And second up, I'm shameless promo. For anybody who lives or has an electricity account in Acton and doesn't know about our municipal aggregation program, which is Acton Power Choice, or our clean energy coaching program, if you're interested in heat pumps or weatherization, insulation, energy audits, solar, EVs, any of that stuff, people in this row can talk to you about them. Thank you.
Always love a shameless promoter.
Well deserved. Yeah, to reiterate, thank you. This is an incredible point. I think listening to the group, like we make decisions on costs, I think we're environmentalists too, but I haven't really heard a lot about the resilience of climate change and our changing storms, right? That will drastically impact grid. I saw your chart of, we're continuing to become more electrified. The perfect storm, that potentially puts a lot of stress onto the health of that electric grid, and making a decision upon how we are going to continue to, or how we evolve to energize and warm our households. I think the risk associated with a grid going down, I think, is another part of the decision. I don't know if you want to talk about the health of the electric grid and the capability for continuing to advance that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The answer is obviously there will always be a risk in any system that a winter storm will knock out your heat. Actually, with a lot of gas heaters right now, they do not function for a long period of time without access to electricity. So many homes already have their access to heat dependent on their access to electricity. A good lucky accident we have is historically Massachusetts has always had a summer peaking grid. The time period where the electric grid has had to move the most energy has always been on hot days in the summer when everyone is cranking their AC. And that means in the winter right now, we have an electric grid that is overbuilt. And as it currently stands right now, we're not expecting us to move to a winter peaking grid when the time where the most electricity is being used until the late 2030s. So we have a long time where people can be using heat pumps and heating their homes increasingly with electricity before it becomes too much of an issue with a lot of the electric grid. Although we do need to do things to prepare, and I know one thing that the electric utilities are doing, in part because they love anything that involves a big infrastructure project where they get to spend money and charge us all more rates, is burying a lot of important electric lines that keep getting knocked down. So there is that resiliency work going in to make sure that, people can depend on the system, and we don't end up like Texas, where Winter Storm Uri knocked out their power grid. I will say, we have a much better electricity system than the Texans do. We do things like make sure natural gas plants are capable of operating if it's under 20 degrees. We haven't needlessly cut off ourselves from the rest of the power grid of the United States. Because fun fact, this is just random knowledge that haunts me. There are 4 major power grids north of Mexico, and it doesn't make any sense how these exist. There is the Eastern Interconnection, which is the Eastern United States. There is the Western Interconnection, which is the Western United States. There is Quebec, and there is Texas, because they had to do their own things. But fortunately, we're not Texas.
Good question.
Yeah.
I've spoken with environmentalists, mainly in Western Mass. They're concerned about alternative energy projects going in protected lands. How much land mass is needed for the entire state to run on renewables?
The honest answer is not as much as the answer is some, to be blunt. We do, I don't know the square footage, but it would definitely be in square miles as to the amount of like solar we need. Obviously, we can put some of that on people's roofs, but putting it out on fields is actually cheaper. Then obviously wind turbines take up some amount of space, even if it's not that much. I will say some of what some opposition does kind of just boil down to NIMBYism. I don't want solar panels in my community, even though I want to use electricity, and I also don't want a different energy source there. There's resistance to building anything, which is a major issue when we're trying to talk about moving away from fossil fuels. Our fossil fuel plants are already built, and the fact that it's challenging to build new things in Massachusetts often means that wind and solar projects don't get built as fast as they otherwise could have, which sometimes means that you were counting on a lot of offshore winds, but you didn't manage to build it during a friendly federal administration, and now you find yourself in an unfriendly one. So land use is definitely going to be an issue, but another thing to point out is, we already use a massive amount of the continental United States for renewable energy. It's actually mostly just biofuels. 40% of our soybeans across the country go into making biodiesel, and a massive percentage of the land we use to use corn, I think about the land area of like Indiana, goes into just ethanol production. So to whatever extent we can also limit biofuel production, that can be lands that could be more productively used with wind and solar, which is just more efficient per unit of land that you give it.
I was going to ask you about biofuel as well, because that's not an option for someone going through Mass A who wants to get off of home heating oil.
Oh, you have entered a pet peeve of mine. Thank you for bringing that up. So there is a lobby group of heating oil dealers that want to see their business continue on forever, and their plan is they are going to get more people to buy heating oil as their strategy. And there's a few different issues with this. One is heating oil is more expensive. Biofuel heating oil is more expensive than its fossil fuel equivalent, unlike electric heat pumps, which can pretty consistently outcompete both regular diesel and biodiesel. Heating oil is just diesel with literal food dye in it, and it's taxed differently. Other than that, it's basically the same thing. So they really want the state to subsidize biofuels so that they get to continue being in business. And there's actually something of a debate about how much the state is going to support heat pumps for electrification to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how much it's going to be biofuels. Right now, with some of the cutbacks in clean energy programs, I think the answer could be neither, but it is an important debate. I think in the long run, the biofuel people are going to lose, because on economics, they have been unable to make their products more affordable, while heat pumps have continually gotten more efficient, solar panels have got more efficient. So technologically, they have just been falling more and more behind for the last decade. And then there's the facts, and you can read a great report on this written by me as a consultant for Physicians for Social Responsibility if you're ever bored. Biofuel heating fuels do create air pollutants in the same way that fossil fuels do. And while the heating oil business will tell you that this is actually green and they don't produce much in the way of air pollution, there is no real scientific backing for that, and we don't really know how much air pollution using biofuel heating fuels causes, which is not great when you're trying to think about state policy.
All right, any last questions from people? All right, please, let's give a big round of applause to Carrie.
Thank you, everybody. Green Energy Consumers Alliance does have a blog that you could subscribe to if you ever want me ranting more, but in like written form instead.
Great. So thank you so much, Carrie. Really appreciate it. And as I often say about the district I represent, just really appreciate people who care so much about everything from electricity bills to what we're doing on climate action plans at the local level to what we're doing to meeting our carbon emissions reductions goals at the state level. So thanks so much for coming to Energy Cost 101. Again, another round of applause for Carrie Katan, Mass Policy Advocate for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And I also want to give thank you to Megan Serino, my Environmental Policy Advisor. Megan, thank you so much for a great job. Thanks, everybody. And this was taped by ActonTV, so it'll be on streaming at some point throughout the week and throughout the month. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.